Welcome to Fierce Queen's Reckoning. I'm so glad you found us today. Now let's get right into it. The venture capitalist drove his $140,000 Porsche Cayenne up the cracked asphalt driveway of a sagging yellow bungalow in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, carrying a $75,000 certified cheque and a 25-year-old girlfriend who had already spent the 40-minute drive from Halifax complaining about the smell of low tide. He came to humiliate his ex-wife. He came to make her sign away the last thing she had ever built with her own hands. He had no idea he was about to walk into the most expensive art studio east of Montreal, or that the soft-spoken woman who opened that peeling front door had just closed a $4.2 million deal with a Vancouver gallery consortium at 7 o'clock that same morning. Chapter 1. The Man in the Porsche. 43-year-old Lena Voss had learned, over the course of her adult life, to read a room before anyone in that room knew she was reading it. It was a skill she developed not in any boardroom or gallery, but in the cramped studios of her graduate program at NSCAD, where she'd learned to stand very still in front of a canvas and see not what was there, but what was underneath. She was standing in her kitchen when she heard the Porsche pull up. She knew the engine. She had listened to it idle in her own driveway for 4 years of marriage, and the sound still registered somewhere low in her chest, the way a scar registers cold weather. She set down her mug of black coffee. She didn't go to the window. She already knew what she was going to see. Her lawyer, Patricia Chen, had called her 3 days ago with a warning. Lena, your ex-husband's team has been making noise about the Thorn Collective trademark. The IP transfer from your separation agreement apparently has a gray area. His new counsel has identified it. He's going to come to you directly. He doesn't want a paper trail. Patricia had paused. He's bringing the girlfriend. Lena had thanked her calmly, poured a second cup of coffee, and gone back to the studio. Her ex-husband's name was Sterling Voss. He was 49 years old, silver-haired, and so convinced of his own gravitational pull that he still hadn't figured out that most of the rooms he commanded only stayed quiet because the people in them had already decided he wasn't worth the energy. Sterling had grown up in old Halifax money, the kind that came with a last name on a hospital wing and a father who called every check a gift. He had spent his 20s burning through that inheritance at a speed that impressed even himself, and his 30s rebuilding it through a venture capital firm called Voss Meridian, which had backed a series of tech and creative sector companies across Atlantic Canada. He was genuinely good at identifying undervalued assets and making them perform. He just had a specific blind spot when it came to identifying the people who had actually built those assets in the first place. When Sterling and Lena had met 12 years ago, she was a 31-year-old visual artist with a quiet reputation in the maritime arts scene and a side income as a brand consultant for small creative businesses. She had a gift for building something from nothing. Visual identities, brand languages, the kind of cohesive aesthetic architecture that made a small gallery feel inevitable, like it had always existed and always would. Sterling had hired her to rebrand a struggling design collective he'd just invested in. 3 months later, he'd asked her to dinner. 2 years after that, they'd married in a small ceremony on the Eastern Shore, and Lena had brought into that marriage not just herself, but the Thorn Collective, a small, fierce, artist-run brand cooperative she had founded in her own name, which represented 12 emerging maritime visual artists and licensed their work to mid to high-end interior design firms, hospitality groups, and private collectors across the country. The Thorn Collective was, at the time of their marriage, generating modest but consistent revenue. Sterling had offered to help it scale. That offer, in retrospect, was the most expensive sentence she had ever agreed to. Over 3 years of marriage, Sterling restructured the collective's operating model, brought in 2 outside investors from his network, and aggressively expanded its licensing portfolio into commercial real estate, hotel chains, and luxury retail. By year 4, the Thorn Collective had 12 times the revenue it had generated when Lena ran it from her studio in Dartmouth. Sterling considered this his success story. He told it at every dinner party. When the marriage ended, not with a fight, but with the particular quiet implosion of 2 people who have become strangers on a shared lease. Sterling's lawyers had moved with the precise surgical efficiency of people who have done this before. The separation agreement that Lena had signed, exhausted and already thinking about how she was going to survive the next 6 months, transferred operational control and the majority shareholder stake of the Thorn Collective to a holding company under Voss Meridian. What it did not transfer, Because Sterling's lawyers had been very focused on the operational structure and not particularly focused on the original intellectual property, was the foundational design system Lena had built before the collective was ever incorporated. The visual language, the brand architecture, the proprietary licensing methodology she had spent 4 years developing, which she had documented and filed under a separate creative copyright in her own name. Because she was meticulous about that kind of thing, even when no one was watching. She hadn't mentioned it during the divorce proceedings. She had simply packed her studio equipment, taken the deed to this yellow bungalow on the Dartmouth waterfront, which the lawyers had assumed was worth less than it was, because they'd looked at the exterior, and disappeared. The Porsche engine shut off. Lena picked up her coffee mug. She heard 2 car doors. She heard the girlfriend first. A sharp little exclamation. Something about the driveway. Something about her shoes. Then Sterling's voice, low and amused. The voice he used when he wanted someone to know he found them charming. She walked to the front door and opened it before he could knock. Sterling Voss stood on the bottom step of her front porch, one hand in the pocket of a beautifully cut charcoal overcoat, the other holding a black leather portfolio. He looked, as he always had, like the cover of a magazine that no longer existed. Standing beside him, half a step behind and conspicuously gripping his arm, was a young woman Lena had seen exactly once before, in the background of a photo someone had sent her without comment. Her name was Jade. She was wearing a cream-colored wrap coat that probably cost $4,000, and she was surveying the front of Lena's house with the expression of someone who had been promised a museum and arrived at a garage sale. "Lena," Sterling said. His voice landed with the particular warmth of a man who has convinced himself this is going to go well. "You look well." Lena looked at him. "Sterling," she said. She let the silence sit for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to be uncomfortable, and then stepped back. "Come in." Chapter 2. What they saw. The front hallway of the Dartmouth bungalow was, by design, unpromising. The original hardwood floors had been left bare and unpolished in this section. The walls were painted a flat, unremarkable gray. A single overhead bulb cast a yellowish light over a coat rack, a pair of weathered work boots, and a stack of what appeared to be old shipping boxes. The ceiling had a water stain from a leak Lena had never bothered to repair on this side of the house, because no one she cared about ever came through the front door. Sterling glanced at the water stain. Something in his posture relaxed slightly. "How long have you been dealing with that?" he asked, nodding upward. "A while," Lena said, already walking toward the back of the house. Jade picked her way down the hallway, with her heels angled carefully to avoid the uneven seam between 2 floorboards. She said nothing, but Lena heard her quiet intake of breath when she caught sight of the studio beyond. Because the back half of the Dartmouth bungalow was not the front half of the Dartmouth bungalow. The renovation had taken 18 months and had been done in stages, quietly, with a contractor Lena had worked with since her graduate school days and who had understood exactly what she needed. A space that looked like nothing from the street and like everything from inside. The original back wall had been removed and replaced with a continuous expanse of north-facing skylights. 11 feet of triple-glazed glass angled to catch the flat, even light that painters have chased for centuries. The light that was falling through them now, on this late October afternoon, was the color of old cream, and it fell across the studio in long, soft planes that made the space feel like the inside of a cathedral. The floors here were polished white oak. The walls were plaster, painted in a warm off-white that Lena had custom mixed herself to a specific percentage of raw umber, a formula she'd never written down. Along the north wall hung 9 large format pieces, 2 of her own, 7 from artists in the collective, each one lit by a narrow gallery track that threw the brushwork into precise, dramatic relief. The piece directly opposite the hallway entrance was a 4x6-foot oil on linen by a Wolastoqiyik artist from Fredericton named Desiree Atwin, whose licensing deal with a Toronto hospitality group had just been renegotiated at 3 times its original rate. In the center of the room was a 12-foot work table in solid black walnut, its surface immaculate. On one end sat a professional-grade monitor, open to a licensing contract. On the other end, a hand-thrown ceramic mug of tea that was still faintly steaming. Beyond the studio, through another wall of glass, was the back garden. A narrow, deep yard running down to the harbor water, landscaped in native grasses and flat granite slabs, with a small wood-fired kiln at the far end that Lena used for ceramic experiments she never sold. Sterling stopped walking. Lena watched him do the thing she had been waiting for him to do. the slow, involuntary recalibration. His eyes moved from the Atwin piece to the skylight to the walnut table to the view of the water. She could see the exact moment his internal valuation software kicked in and started reassigning numbers. Jade had stopped too. She was standing very still in a way that suggested she was not used to standing very still. "Lena," Sterling said, and his voice had changed. The warm, performative ease was gone. When did you do all of this?" "I've been busy," Lena said, and walked to the far end of the walnut table. She pulled out a chair and sat down, crossing her ankles. She did not offer them seats. Sterling set his portfolio on the near end of the table. He looked around the studio again, slower this time, and Lena could see him doing what he always did when a situation had departed from his script, looking for the seam, the flaw, the thing that would allow him to reassert his original read of the room. He found nothing, because there was nothing to find. "It must have been quite alone," Sterling said at last, with a slight tightening at the corners of his mouth. "I paid cash," Lena said simply. She watched that land. Chapter 3. The Check. Sterling opened the portfolio. He was a man who recovered quickly. She had always given him that. Within 30 seconds, he had relocated his confidence and was laying it back out in front of him like a freshly pressed shirt. "I'll get straight to it," he said. "Voss Meridian is finalizing an acquisition. We've been in talks for 8 months with a Calgary-based hospitality investment group, Calendar Pacific. They're acquiring the full operating portfolio of the Thorn Collective as part of a broader creative sector roll-up. The deal closes in 3 weeks. The total consideration is $11 million. He let that number settle. During due diligence, Sterling continued, his voice taking on the measured, "We're all professionals." Here cadence she recognized from every difficult conversation he'd ever initiated. Calendar's legal team flagged something in the original IP documentation. The Thorn brand system, the visual grammar, the licensing methodology, the underlying design framework. It's the backbone of every revenue stream the collective operates. Their IP counsel is asking for a supplementary assignment, just a clean, explicit transfer of the underlying creative copyright, specifically for the Thorn design framework and its associated licensing protocols. He reached into the portfolio and produced a document, maybe 30 pages, stapled. He placed it on the walnut table and slid it toward her. "It's a standard housekeeping measure," he said. "The divorce settlement covered operational transfer. This just closes the loop on the underlying architecture." He reached back into the portfolio. "And because I know this is asking something of you, and because I want to be fair," he produced a certified check and placed it on top of the document. $75,000. Tax-free consideration. It's more than generous for what amounts to a signature. Jade, who had stationed herself near the window facing the garden, leaned slightly forward. She was looking at Lena the way women sometimes look at other women when they have been told a story about them and are now trying to reconcile that story with what they are actually seeing. "Lena," Jade said. Her voice was not unkind, but it carried the particular authority of someone who has decided to be diplomatic on behalf of someone else. "He's being fair. It's a quick signature. You walk away with $75,000 for something you're not even using anymore." Lena looked at her. "The Thorn design framework," Lena said, "generated $2.1 million in licensing revenue for the collective last year." Jade blinked. "So," Lena continued, her voice perfectly level, "you'll understand why I'm not in a hurry." She looked down at the check. She did not touch it. She read the amount. She set it aside. She looked at Sterling. "You didn't come here because of a gap in the documentation, Sterling." He held her gaze. "Lena, Calendar Pacific didn't flag a gap," she said. "They stopped the deal." The studio was very quiet. Outside through the glass, a gull was moving in slow circles above the harbor. Sterling's jaw tightened. "That's not." "Their IP counsel identified the discrepancy 4 days ago," Lena said. "Not a gap, a wall. The Thorn design framework was never included in the operational transfer. I copyrighted it under my personal holding company, Cedarline Creative, 14 months before the Thorn Collective was ever incorporated." She let that sit. "The framework was licensed to the collective on a revocable, non-exclusive basis through a vendor services agreement in the collective's founding documents," she continued. "The agreement is still valid, or it was until I formally revoked it at midnight 2 nights ago." Sterling was very still. "Without the framework," Lena said, "the Thorn Collective's licensing methodology is unenforceable. Every active commercial contract references the Thorn design standards, which are proprietary to Cedarline. Calendar Pacific's lawyers will have found this by now. The acquisition is on hold. Sterling stared at her. His face had gone through several colors in the space of about 15 seconds, settling finally at a gray-white that was not a good color on anyone. "You're bluffing," he said. His voice was flat. "Patricia Chen filed the notice of revocation with the copyright board," Lena said. "I can show you the confirmation if you'd like." She reached across the table, tapped the keyboard of the monitor, and rotated the screen 45 degrees so it faced him. Sterling leaned forward. He read. His eyes moved across the screen twice. He stood back up. Chapter 4. The Call. Sterling pulled out his phone. His general counsel's name was Marcus Webb, and he had been Sterling's lawyer for 11 years. The call connected on the second ring. "Marcus." Sterling's voice was low and controlled in the way that meant the opposite. "I'm in Dartmouth. Tell me the calendar situation is a technicality." A pause. Then the sound of a man who has been awake since early morning and has not had a good time of it. "Sterling," Marcus said. "Tell me you didn't go there without calling me first." "Marcus, we found the Cedar Line registration this morning." Marcus sounded like he was reading from notes. "The Thorn Design Framework copyright is registered to Cedar Line Creative Inc. Sole director Lena Voss, filed 14 months prior to the incorporation of the Thorn Collective. The vendor services agreement in the collective's founding documents granted the collective a non-exclusive, revocable license for the framework. It was not flagged during the acquisition of the collective's operational stake, because our team did not understand the technical distinction between the operational platform and the underlying design architecture." A very long pause. "The license has been formally revoked," Marcus continued. "We received the notice from the copyright board at 8:17 this morning. Without the framework, the collective's licensing contracts are structurally deficient. Calendar has been on the phone with me since 9. They've suspended the due diligence period pending resolution of the IP question." "Then we contest it," Sterling said. "We argue she developed it as a function of the collective's operations. She developed it before the collective existed," Marcus said. "Sterling, I have to be straight with you. There is no contestable argument here. The copyright is clear. The timeline is clear. The vendor agreement is clear." She was very careful, Sterling repeated quietly. In the studio, Lena poured herself a glass of water from a carafe on the table and drank it slowly, without hurry. Jade had been listening from her position by the window. The studied ease she'd walked in with had drained away gradually over the last 20 minutes, like color leaving a face. She was looking at Sterling now with an expression that had moved from confused to calculating. "Marcus," Sterling said, "what does this mean for the calendar deal?" Another pause. This one longer. "They want the framework," Marcus said. "Without it, the portfolio they're acquiring doesn't perform the way their model assumes. The valuation drops significantly. They've been very clear about that." He paused. "They haven't walked away, Sterling. But they've told me, informally, that if Cedar Line Creative is not part of the acquisition, the deal doesn't work for them." Sterling ended the call. He stood at the end of the walnut table and looked at Lena. She looked back at him. Her expression was the same one she'd had when she opened the front door. Calm, awake, faintly interested. The way she looked at a canvas before she decided what it needed. "I'll buy Cedar Line from you," Sterling said. The words came out faster than he intended. "Whatever Calendar's offering for the collective, I'll give you half. $5.5 million. It's more than fair. You get a check tomorrow morning. I close the deal on schedule, and we're done." Lena tilted her head very slightly. "Sterling," she said, and her voice was almost gentle, "Calendar isn't buying the framework from you." He frowned. She reached into the single drawer of the walnut table and produced her phone. She found what she was looking for. She laid the phone on the table and turned it to face him. It was an email. Chapter 5. The Real Acquisition. The email was from a woman named Diana Holt, Senior Vice President of Creative Assets at Calendar Pacific. It was time-stamped at 6:48 that morning, before the banks had opened, before the coffee had finished in Lena's kitchen. It was addressed to Lena Voss, Director, Cedar Line Creative Inc. The subject line read, "Letter of Intent. Direct Acquisition of Cedar Line Creative Inc." Sterling read it standing up. He read it twice. The letter outlined Calendar Pacific's interest in acquiring Cedar Line Creative directly, as the primary IP holder of the Thorn Design Framework and its associated methodologies. The proposed consideration was $4.8 million in cash, plus a creative directorship offer with a 2-year guaranteed contract at a salary that was printed in the email in plain black text, and which Sterling read twice as well. The letter noted that Calendar's team had been in contact with Lena since Tuesday. That was before Sterling had called his lawyers. That was before any of this had started. Sterling set the phone down. He did not look up immediately. He looked at the surface of the walnut table, at the fine grain of the wood, at the light falling across it from the skylights. He was doing the math, and the math was doing things to him that were visible on his face. They came to you directly, he said. They came to the person who owns the asset, Lena said. The silence in the studio was very complete. The gull outside had gone. The harbor was flat and silver in the afternoon light, and the kiln at the end of the garden cast a long shadow across the granite slabs. You planned this, Sterling said. It wasn't an accusation exactly. It was the voice of a man arriving somewhere he hadn't expected to arrive. Lena considered the question. I built something, she said. You were very focused on the operational structure. I was focused on the foundation. You waited, he said. The collective wasn't worth enough before, she said, and she said it the same way she might explain a technical process. Without heat, without performance. 3 years ago, a disruption would have been a minor inconvenience to your firm and a major problem for the artists I represent. I needed the platform at its maximum value before the architecture mattered. Sterling looked at her. Something had left his face, not the arrogance exactly, but the infrastructure that supported it. The artists in the collective, he said. What happens to them? Calendar is acquiring the operational platform as part of the same transaction, Lena said. The artists keep their representation agreements. They gain access to Calendar's national network, and the licensing methodology they've been building their practices around for 4 years will now be enforced by a team with the legal resources to protect it properly. She paused. They'll do better. And the framework, he said. Comes with me, she said. I'll be creative director. I'll still be running the design standards I built. I just won't be doing it from a yellow house in Dartmouth, at a disadvantage. Sterling was quiet for a long time. The refrigerator made a faint sound. Somewhere upstairs a window was open, and the late October air was moving through it. I need something to bring back to Voss Meridian, he said at last. His voice had gone quiet in a way she hadn't heard from him in a long time. The firm put 2 investors into this deal. If I walk out of here with nothing, the exposure is significant. The operational platform is still worth what it's worth, Lena said. Calendar will acquire it. Your investors will see returns. The deal closes. Just not the way you drew it up. And me personally? She looked at him steadily. You should call Marcus. He didn't move. Sterling, she said, and this time there was something in her voice that was neither warm nor cold, just honest, the voice she used when she was telling the truth about something that mattered. I didn't do this to take something from you. You took something from me and called it a restructuring. I just spent 4 years making sure that when the moment came, I'd be standing on the right side of the paperwork. Chapter 6. After. Jade left first. She was not cruel about it, which Lena noted with a small degree of respect. She picked up her bag, told Sterling she was going to get a coffee and would call a car from there, and walked back, down the narrow front hallway without drama or performance. The front door closed behind her with a clean, decisive click. Sterling sat in the chair at the end of the walnut table for a long time after that. He was looking at the Atwin piece on the north wall, the big one, the oil on linen, the one Lena had hung there because the light hit it best in the late afternoon, and because it was the first piece she'd licensed after she left the collective's operational structure behind. It was a painting of a shoreline. The water in it was the exact color of the harbor outside. It's extraordinary, he said quietly, looking at it. I know, Lena said. That's why I took the copyright. Sterling almost smiled. It was the closest thing to an honest expression she had seen from him in several years. He picked up the portfolio and the document and the certified check, and he stood. He buttoned his coat. He looked around the studio one more time. The skylights, the walnut table, the long view to the water. And Lena watched him doing the thing she had once found compelling about him. The thing that had made her trust him with her work in the first place. He could look at something and understand its value. He had just never, not once, understood that she was the one who had built it. I'll call Marcus, he said. That's a good idea, she said. She walked him down the front hallway and opened the heavy door. The afternoon light was going gold. Down the street, a maple had gone full orange overnight, and the leaves were moving in the harbor wind. Sterling paused on the top step. You were always better at the long game than I was, he said. I know that too, she said. He nodded once. He went down the steps. She heard the Porsche door open and close. She heard the engine. She stood in the doorway until the sound of it had gone entirely. Then she closed the door. She walked back through the quiet house to the studio. The afternoon light through the skylights had shifted while they'd been talking, and now it fell at a different angle, catching the texture of the Atwin piece in a way it only did for about 20 minutes each day. Lena stood in front of it for a moment and looked at the shoreline, the low gray water, the suggestion of a figure at the far edge of the frame that might have been a woman walking, or might have been a shadow. She picked up her phone. There was a message from Patricia Chen. "I heard from Calendar's team. They're moving forward. You good?" She typed back. "Better than good. Call me tomorrow." She set the phone face down on the walnut table. She went to the kitchen and ground a single dose of dark roast from a bag she'd brought back from a small roaster on Gottingen Street, fed it into the portafilter, and pulled a short espresso into a ceramic cup she'd made herself in the kiln 3 winters ago. It was imperfect, the rim slightly uneven, the glaze pooled on one side. And she used it every morning because of that, because she had made it with her own hands, and it was irreplaceable. She carried the cup to the back garden and stood on the granite slabs in the last of the afternoon light, looking out at the harbor. The water was the color it got in October, that particular flat pewter that looked like the sky had come down to rest. She drank the espresso. The Thorn design framework was hers. It had always been hers. It would be hers on paper as of Monday morning, when the calendar agreement was countersigned and filed, and it would be hers in every room she walked into from now on. She had built the foundation, waited for someone else to build the house on top of it, and then quietly, without announcement, pulled the foundation out from under them at the exact moment it would matter most. She wasn't angry. She hadn't been angry in a long time. Anger was loud and expensive, and it got in the way of the work. She set the empty cup on the flat granite beside her and put her hands in the pockets of her wool coat and looked at the harbor until the light was gone. Then she went back inside to finish the contract.